Hello and welcome to this, our 87th live stream. 8,000 subs. Further and farther than we ever thought. Boy, is that true. Uh, we've almost been going for 3 years as a channel. And we did not, let me put it this way, we planned for failure, we didn't plan for success. So, we thought, ancient Egypt and the Bible, that's such a niche topic. I mean, who'd ever want to know anything about Egypt and the Bible? So we thought we were going to be a one, in the 100s, 200s, 500s subscriber level as a channel, and we were happy with that. We thought, okay, great, 500 people are listening to us. Fantastic. Wonderful. Wonderful. And in our early days, and frankly, we haven't changed our tone through the entire life of this channel. We've always been a little edgy. We've been a little edgy. We've done a lot of humor. We have at times copped an attitude. And that hasn't always rubbed people the right way. So we figured, okay, we are going to be who we are, and people will like it or people won't. And we figured most people wouldn't, but those who stick around would really profit from this. So we just kept doing what Nick did. Okay. Okay. I just got a message that OBS disconnected and reconnected. So, as I was saying, early on, we had one commenter on our channel that basically said I had to change my attitude. Otherwise, and he prophesied this. He prophesied that I would never reach 1,000 subscribers. Okay. It's like, yeah. Yeah, there was a technical glitch there. OBS disconnected and reconnected. So we're back up. OBS handled that automatically. So it looks like we're good. It looks like we're good. But we had people who were prophesying that we wouldn't get past 1,000 subscribers. Now, wow, if you start prophesying in the name of the Lord and it don't come to pass, ooh, that sort of makes you a false prophet. So one has to be very, very careful about prophesying, especially if it comes true and, there's no way to back out of that. So, but we've done some amazing things on this channel, and it's mostly thanks to our subscribers here who enjoy our content and have really responded positively to it. We have a sock puppet who's become a celebrity all of his own, and we did not expect to when we first started this. We did not expect to have sock puppets on the channel. We have done popcorn reviews where we have used stick figure drawings. We've just done some crazy stuff. Which reminds me, next Monday, not this one coming up, but following on the 16th, we've got another popcorn review coming. We've already posted in the community chat that people started guessing what it will be, and that's part of the fun of a popcorn. Doesn't reveal its secrets until the kernels are popped. So that should be very exciting. It's going to be at 8 p.m. on the 16th, and it'll be a premiere. So I will be on the live chat there, enjoying the party with you and eating my popcorn again. And that's the best thing about these popcorn reviews. I get to eat popcorn twice. Once during the taping and once when it's going live. So popcorn, oh yeah. Salty, buttery popcorn, fantastic. Yeah, I shouldn't eat it as often as I do, but hey, there you go. So anyway, we're going to get into the questions now. We got full lineup already, and this is going to be fantastic like always, because we got some really, really good ones tonight. And we also, just again, the rules are that Super Chats have priority. You know, that's true of all YouTube channels. We also should mention that if you don't post a Super Chat, and that's fine, we take non-Super Chat questions too, at least as many as we can, or as many as interest me. We ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of your comment, so I know it's being directed to me and not to somebody else in the live chat. I also ask that you post it only once, so that I can actually scan it and see where I am in the stream. The third thing is that if it has to do with a verse in the Bible, I ask that you give the book of the Bible, the chapter and verse, so I have some context. And if it's deals with a foreign language, tell me what language you think it's in, and what you think the word means, so I have some sort of basis of reference here. Okay? So, with that said, let's start getting into the questions. And we're going to start tonight with 5 non-super chats. So 5 regular questions. And our first question is actually from Cole Walker. And he asks, would it be okay to post cards for the channel on notification boards at local churches? Sure, absolutely. That would be fantastic. We don't actually promote this channel very much. We've got no budget for promotion. We don't go church to church like ABR does. We don't have extra people in the ministry. It's just more or less myself and my wife, who does the moderation here. We have a few volunteers on Discord, but we have zero budget for marketing or promotion. We do the swag in the store, you know, like Mr. Empty Conjecture cups, Ancient Egypt and the Bible mugs, t-shirts, etc., as kind of a way of slipping in advertising as well as providing funky merchandise. Now that was demanded by the subscribers. We were not going to do that, honestly. That's another thing we never expected to do. Was sell merch. You know, that's not the way I usually do things. And it's just like, okay, we got a merch store now. How did that happen? A lot of people had a very good Christmas. And reports. I haven't received mine yet, by the way. I did order some for myself. But I have other people have gotten their stuff before I have, and it's like, okay, I'm really trusting that this stuff looks quality, and so far it has looked very good from the pictures I've received from other people. So,
living that rock band life.
Oh yeah, living that rock band life, totally. Cat Factory.
Cole Walker's enjoying his sweatshirt.
Oh, awesome! Cole Walker says, "I'm enjoying my sweatshirt. Fantastic." But, we never expected to do that either. But absolutely, all I would request is that if you design a postcard, send me a copy of, maybe a GIF file or whatever, or whatever format you're using, and so I can have a look at it because I'm curious. Okay, but that would be the only thing I would ask send it to me. So that I can actually, see what you're doing. But absolutely, make postcards, put them on church bulletin boards. That would be fantastic. We would love that. That's the sort of stuff that would really help us out, help us grow as a channel. And we would like to get more grassroots support in the local churches anyway. We think this is important. We think this is important. We think this is that the involvement of the local church is necessary, not only for us as a channel, but also in the that people in the local church can benefit from teaching as well. So, yeah, absolutely go for it. Go for it. So, I would really appreciate this. So, thank you very much for that question, and thank you for that great suggestion. Okay, our next question is actually from Darkblade. And he asks a very interesting question here. 2 Samuel 2:11 and 5:5 say that David reigned over Judah 7.5 years until the reunification of Israel. 2:10 says Ishbosheth reigned over Israel 2 years. This seems to leave 5.5 years unaccounted. Okay? Now, it is, and yet it isn't. It doesn't explicitly say what happens to the 5.5 years, but it's pretty easy to figure out. So let's pull up our Bible. Okay, and I'm going to go to 2 Samuel here. And we'll go to 2 and verse 11. All right. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. And the verse before it. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he became king over Israel, and he was king for 2 years. The house of Judah, however, followed David. Okay. So, this is what happens. Okay, and was there any other verse he referenced here? Okay, he didn't. But that's okay. Because what's going to happen in 2 Samuel 3 is the conquest of Jerusalem. So what happens here, what's going on in this particular passage, is after the death of Saul, there's a civil war. All of Israel follows after Saul's son Ishbosheth. But the tribe of Judah follows after David, who establishes his kingdom in the city of Hebron. Okay. Now, Ishbosheth is assassinated by some of his generals, and basically Israel surrenders to King David after 2 years of civil war. So what happens? What's the 5.5 year span? Is the time it takes for King David to capture Jerusalem. So, David is king in Jerusalem, or in Hebron, for 7.5 years. But at the end of the 7.5 years, he conquers Jerusalem and establishes his capital at Jerusalem. So that's what's going on. He doesn't actually resolve the civil war, then immediately is king in Jerusalem. He has to wait that. Basically, takes him 5.5 years to get that final Jebusite city under his control. So, anyway, and this is actually a problem that Saul never solved. You know, Saul ruled over Israel, but there was always this little Jebusite enclave that was sort of a gadfly to all of Israel inside of the tribe of Judah. So, that's what's happening here. I hope that explains what's going on. Is that David rules 7.5 years. 5.5 of those years, he's already king over all of Israel, but he doesn't have Jerusalem yet. At the end of the 5.5 years, he's now ruler over Jerusalem also. So anyway, thank you for that question. It's a very interesting question. And, but it's also, easily resolved too. Just by, keep reading on the passage, you figure out, 2 Samuel chapter 3, he's going after Jerusalem at that point. So, thank you very much for the question. All right, our next non-super chat here is from The Shadow Knows.
That was my father's favorite.
My producer here just said that was The Shadow Knows was her father's favorite saying, so she had a good laugh at that name. And he asks, in the ancient Hebrew tribal system, when a pagan or non-believer converted to Judaism, Were they placed into a certain tribe, or were they not allowed to be part of any tribe? Could they choose? Well, that's an interesting question right there. Initially, they weren't part of a tribe. So if you converted to Judaism in the ancient Hebrew tribal system, you were not immediately incorporated into a tribe. You usually didn't even have any land. So you ended up generally going to one of the cities, perhaps one of the Levitical cities or one of the larger urban areas. So you were generally incorporated into one of the cities. Now, you would then become incorporated into a tribe through marriage. So basically, as a man with no tribal affiliation, you would marry into a tribe. And then their children would then become proper members of that clan and tribe. So generally, incorporation was done through marriage. Now, this is a little different than, say, during the Exodus, where the mixed multitude were just sort of portioned off into the 12 tribes, more or less on an equal basis. But in the normal course of Israelite life, you would have to marry into a tribe. So generally, that's how it worked. Is you were married into a tribe, and then you'd work your portion of land that was received through the clan inheritance. So that's typically how it worked. So they could choose insofar as they could choose their spouse. But that's probably the extent of it. But they were not part of the tribal system until that sort of intermarriage took place. And sometimes that didn't happen for quite some time, like several generations, if you are from certain groups like the Moabites. You were not allowed to become part of the tribal system for 10 generations. So it took sometimes a very, very long time to get incorporated into that tribal system. Although eventually, if you were faithful Israelites, eventually they were. So, but there's also exceptions to this too, like the line of David. He's the great grandson of Ruth the Moabite. Technically he shouldn't have been an Israelite allowed in assembly for 10 generations, but he's admitted after 4. So there's an element of grace here and God's provision that's also included into this as well. So even that 10 generations is not a hard and fast rule. Not by any stretch of the imagination. So anyway, that's an interesting question. Thank you very much for the question. It's a good question. Then we got this interesting question from Tom Perez. And he says, "Good evening, Dr. Falk." Well, good evening to you too. "Are there any Catholic rituals that you think would be beneficial to Protestant churches and vice versa? I personally am a fan of more organized confession." Okay. Now, a lot of Protestant churches already incorporate, since they are more or less descended from Roman Catholicism, most Protestant churches already have at least in some respects, the Catholic rituals that they think are most beneficial. Particularly baptism and the Lord's Supper, although they ascribe different meanings to both. Now, I do think there is benefit in confession. I think that's probably the one sort of thing Protestant churches are missing is confession. However, I think even that would require some tweaking. Now, here's the benefit of confession. The benefit of confession is that there are people out there that don't feel forgiven, even though they confess their sins, unless there's a priest or some sacerdotal agent that basically tells them you are forgiven. That's definitely true. I mean, psychologists have proven this, that some people do need to hear the words "you are forgiven," but some people don't. So here's sort of the sort of the middle of the road approach I would take here. Is I think public, a ritual of confession is a great thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it's inherently good. I think, but there's also several ways to implement it too. You have like the Greek Orthodox form of public confession, where there's a confession altar at the front. You go, you kneel down. You don't tell the priest what you did, but the priest tells you you are forgiven. You pray to God, and the priest tells you are forgiven. Great way to do this. Absolutely fantastic, and it's voluntary. What the one aspect I don't like about Roman Catholic confession is it's not exactly voluntary. You have to go to confession. You have to do this to be a Catholic in good standing. You have to do it once a year, at least as I best recall. Is that correct? Yeah. My wife was a former Roman Catholic, so she probably knows better than I do on this one. But having that ritual be a compulsion, I don't think is healthy. Having a confession booth, fantastic. Go for it. If that's the way you want to do confession, I think that's a great way to do confession. I also think, though, that private confession is also equally efficacious. But for some people, it's not as convincing. So this is really, really going to depend upon the value of this is really going to depend on the person. But I absolutely think that a form of, say, confession ritual is something that Protestants do need to add. And I think that's appropriate. I think it's biblical. I don't see any problems with it other than making it compulsory. If you make it compulsory, then you're really forcing people to confess. Not making it voluntary and basically having the person come to Jesus on the terms that the Holy Spirit would demand. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for that question. Very, very interesting. Okay, now, this is a very touchy question here. So we're going to handle this next one here with kid gloves. Anti-Life Superman says, some people argue that the Bible doesn't comment on or morally oppose pedophilia. What's your take on this? Well, it does oppose it, but it opposes it in sort of a catch bucket way. And we also have to be very careful as to how we define pedophilia here, too, because the definition of pedophilia is somewhat broad. Basically, there are people who define pedophilia as anything, any sexual contact with a person 19 years old or less. Okay? So that's a huge age range, which in the past, if you were 19, you were probably already married in the ancient world. Very, very few people were as old as 19 and still single. It would have been seen as sort of almost irresponsible for a parent to let you get to age 19 without an appropriate spouse. Now, granted, there were some awfully young marriages in the ancient world. The youngest that's sort of recorded is, I believe, Agnes of France. In 1180, she was age 9 when she married And she married a 12-year-old. And then, 3 years later, she was actually widowed. So she counts as both the youngest marriage and one of the youngest widows too. So, um, things were tough in the ancient world. Things were tough in the past. But at the same time, too, if you sort of break this more down into pedophilia, hebephilia, and ephebophilia, where the Tanner classifications, say, pedophilia is, somebody who's 11, under the age of 11, basically prepubescent. In the ancient world, that was almost a non-starter for marriage. People could be betrothed at that age, but they weren't ever, put into marriage at that age unless you were a man, which is very strange all on its own. And because there's actually some very young kings who marry very young. Again, because the king is forced to produce heirs. So we do have examples like King Tutankhamun. He was married at age 10. Ankh-Sunamun, his wife, was 16. So there is definitely political factors that were involved in those, say, ancient marriages. However, most of those, say, betrothals of, say, more average people would occur in more the hebephilia range to ephebophilia range of basically ages 11 to 19. Basically pubescent children. People who are already developing secondary sexual characteristics. So, the question then comes down to the morality of this, which is that, are we talking about pedophilia as a child marriage? Are we talking about pedophilia as, say, just a general act? As a form of child marriage, the Bible would not classify that as a morally reprehensible act. It's done with the permission of the parents. It's usually done after puberty. So that comes down to what is the survival in an ancient world. Okay? And people had to do things back then in the ancient world just to survive. And among them is to marry young. Marry young, produce a lot of children, because most of your children aren't going to survive. Infant childbirth infant mortality was so high in the ancient world, it wasn't even funny. So in order for you to produce enough children to carry on the family, you had to start young. That's just the reality of infant mortality. However, the flip side of this is that people who were, say, molesting children, that's different. That's covered under the adultery laws and the rape laws. Though that's totally, the Bible speaks out definitely, we could put that in the same category as adultery and rape. Sorry, that R word. I'm not supposed to say on YouTube. But it would condemn that utterly. Condemn that utterly. Because it's covered under a different law. So it doesn't have to, it's sort of kind of like, why doesn't the Bible say anything about computer fraud? Well, computers hadn't been invented at the time of the Bible. However, fraud was. So, the Bible does cover fraud. Do not defraud your neighbor. So even though computer fraud had not been developed yet, the other laws concerning, false witness, stealing what's not yours, all that will play into that extrapolated morality. So you base this on the principles of what the Bible is suggesting, and then you can then determine that the Bible will condemn, say, child molestation, just because it's against the rape laws and the adultery laws. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat, or the question. It's an interesting and provocative question, but it's also nuanced as well. In one way, the Bible does not oppose, say, child marriage. On the other hand, sex out of marriage for children, that is condemned. That is absolutely condemned. Yeah. Well, there are cases where it is an older and younger couple. Okay, so that doesn't follow. But then again, too, again, when it comes to child marriage, it's always with somebody who is past puberty. And almost every society knows, in the ancient world knew this. So it didn't have to say it. And the rest of it was covered by the catch bucket, thou shalt not commit adultery. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. It's a very provocative and important question, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay. Let's get to our super chats now. Okay, our first super chat here is from Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. How do we know that the Exodus and conquest narratives fall under the literary genre of historical narrative? Okay. Pretty much because it's... Okay, we've got a selection of genres we could pick here. We know it's not poetry. Okay. The structure of poetry in Hebrew is, and the rest of the ancient Near East, is pretty obvious. So it's definitely not poetry. It's not myth either, because myth is basically a timeless account of the interaction of the gods. And the Exodus and Conquest are definitely not timeless. They definitely fall within a certain time and space parameters. At least they purport to be. So we are left then with very few choices as far as genre goes. And the chronicling, the temporal nature of the Conquest and Exodus has us, with one event happening right after the other. That's very indicative of being a historical narrative. Now, the historicity of that can be debated. However, there's no question that the narrative itself is using the literary genre of historical narrative just because of the way of its structure, its use of historical figures, its and the fact is that it doesn't fall under any other possible category of genre. So you could use the process of the elimination or the positive evidence that this is basically an attempt to go one right after the other as far as sequence of time and events. So basically, that's how we know it's a historical narrative. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Our next super chat here comes from Addison Weir again for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. How would you respond to someone arguing that we can't know anything about ancient history because history is written by the victors? Well, history is always written by the victors, no matter what history you're talking about. It could be the history of the ancient Near East. It could be the history of World War II. History of football. Still written by the victors. It's just... That's just the way history is written. And to say you can't know anything about history because history is written by the victors sort of raises the really awkward question If history is written by the victors, can you know anything about history at all? Well, the obvious answer to that is yes, you can. Um, just because the victors write history, because they're the only ones left, doesn't mean that you can't know anything about history. So I posted on our chats before these earlier today. Did you? Just checking something here. Oh, I see them. All right. Okay, I didn't catch those ones earlier in the day. I will get to them. So, we'll get to those in a moment. Okay. So thank you, Addison, for pointing that out. Oh, by the way, that I saw your really long question too on the documented hypothesis. It's a really good question. It's an excellent question. It's just too long. I can't read the whole thing out. So if you can shorten that question for next time, we'll catch it then. Okay. But it was a really good question, and we should have. I'd love to have taken it, but it's just too long. Okay. But the long and the short of it is, yeah, when you read history that's written by victors, and almost all history is written by victors, there's going to be aspects of it that are going to be true, because it's impossible to be 100% wrong. So you're going to have to, like any historian, do a weigh whether or not what the victor is saying is true, what aspects of it are true, what aspects of it are false. We do have in history the presumption that even though the victor is writing maybe propagandistically or with his particular bias in mind, that elements of his story are going to be true. That's a presumption that every historian has to make.
Especially names, dates, places.
Things like names, dates, places, those sorts of things are presumed to be true. Objective facts are presumed to be true, even if they are written by the victors. So, unless we have good evidence to the contrary. So there is a presumption of truth that we do lend to the writers of history, even if they are on the winning side. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. And now I'm going to go find those other super chats. Okay. This will just take a second. This will just take a second as I sort of cut and paste all these. All right. One at a time here. All right, and our next super chat. Okay, flipping back here now. Okay, I think this is where your super chats start. At least these are the earliest ones I can find. Okay, so sorry about that mix-up. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And again, from Madison Weir here. Will you please post a popcorn review of Zach Miller's recent interview with Aaron Higashi? Well, I appreciate the super chat. The popcorn, however, has its own mind as to who and what it reviews. Now, the way we do popcorn reviews is it has to fit a certain mold. The thing about the way we do popcorn reviews is the video can't be too long. Generally, the videos what we do are between 30 and 45 minutes, generally. They have to be something where we're not going to get copyright struck. So this is why we tend to favor YouTube videos over other types of videos. Because that's going to give us some sort of leeway here on what we can actually review. we as a result too, we are also not going to do commercial stuff like movies, like fiction. Fiction has a very very high bar for copyright protection. It also has to be something that we think is really going to be educate and that's going to edify our audience as well as entertain. I mean, it's got to be fun too. Come on. I mean, it's a popcorn review. So we will keep it in mind. I had heard other people ask for this too. So, but I haven't seen the video yet, so I haven't decided if I'm going to popcorn this or not. On the other hand, I am going to be on Zach Miller's channel, I think, in a few weeks. Although it's not him who's going to be interviewing me, so keep that out and your eye out for that as well. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate, and we'll see. Okay, that's the best I can give you. Okay, get the next one up here. Okay, the next one here. Okay, the next super chat is also again from Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Concerning the composition of the Pentateuch, what are your thoughts on the supplementary type views held by Ralph Hawkins and Michael Heiser? Depends. I do think there's warrant for saying that the Bible has gone under editing over time. Absolutely. I think this change is in diction, grammar, updating of vocabulary. This is just a normal part of, say, basically the copyist process. We see this in the Egyptian documents too, where a Middle Kingdom document, as it's copied into the New Kingdom, it will undergo changes in grammar, diction, as I say, vocabulary. You know, updated in say noun forms, and we do see this. So there is warrant to suggest that some editing was done to the Pentateuch. I don't have a problem with that. The question is, what is the nature of that editing? Now, I haven't looked at the supplementary hypothesis enough to judge it as well as I should, but I think Ralph Hawkins and Michael Heiser are reliable sources. And I have a lot less problem with the supplementary hypothesis than I do with the documentary hypothesis. I do think that the Pentateuch might have had additions over time. I don't have a huge problem with that. I have more of a problem with the idea that the content was basically written, merged, mashed, mushed, redacted over and over and over again. I think that's more problematic. But depending on what's intended here by the supplementary hypothesis, it can be fine. It can be perfectly okay. It can also be complete trash too. So it's going to really depend upon, like for example, like Tommy Thompson's view of the supplementary hypothesis. I think is just so out there, it's not even funny. But it's really going to depend. It really is going to depend on what's actually meant by the supplementary type view. So anyway, that's the best I can give you without actually having looked at their views in detail. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Next cut and paste here. Okay, and okay. Our next one again is from Addison Weir. Thank you very much for the super chat for $4.99. And he asks, does Exodus 20:11 teach a young Earth? Why or why not? Okay. Gonna throw me into yeah, not a broad question in the slightest. Okay, 2011 and okay. And this is from the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, and context here is the Sabbath. All right. And it starts at verse 8. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, rested on the seventh. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Okay. Does this teach young earth? Not necessarily. Okay. This doesn't actually, I mean, if you could potentially have an old earth here and still have 6 literal days of creation, that's possible. You could have a form of progressive creation or theistic evolution where it's not a literal day. That's also a very common reading of this. The text here is not explicit. And that's the point we have to get to here. Is even if we're talking here metaphorical days, the principle remains the same for the commandment. So I don't think this teaches an explicit young earth. I think you could go elsewhere for a young earth, but I think it's very difficult to use biblical texts to imply a young earth. Honestly, but that's, again, if you take this in a sort of ancient Near Eastern context, very, very difficult to assert that this is going to talk about a young earth. So, but anyway, that's the reason. That's the reason is it doesn't have to be young to still be 6 days of creation. And it doesn't have to be full days for this to still apply as far as the teaching of the commandment goes. So again, that would be sort of a jumping to a conclusion here to assert that this is talking about a young earth. So anyway, thank you very much for this super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that answered your question. Did not? Oh, what are our comments on this? Okay. Let's get back to the next super chat here. Well, we got a lot of them from you, don't we? Okay. Oh, I like this one. Okay. I don't know how I missed this many super chats. Wow. Okay, again from Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. When are you going to host another hangout like the debate after party? Oh dear. Well, we were thinking about doing it roughly once a month, but those plans kind of got set aside. We might do one at the after the next popcorn review. Okay, I'm not promising anything, but we are considering doing another one. But yeah, we're thinking about doing another hangout. We're thinking about it. So hang in there, it'll come, and then we'll just do it the same way we did last time on StreamYard, and just chat, talk, take questions, have a good time, and just sort of hang out. So yes, we are thinking of doing them again. The last one was really successful, and we really enjoyed doing it. So it's we do enjoy the process of having people come in and give us feedback as well. So absolutely, we're going to do it again. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Okay, our next super chat here again is from Addison Weir for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. How would you respond to the claim that the resurrection narratives may have been influenced consciously or subconsciously by the resurrection of Osiris? I think it's nonsense. I think it's complete baloney. I won't get into too much detail on this because we might have something coming up on this in the near future. But I will suffice it to say that the resurrection of Osiris is nothing like the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's materially different. The resurrection of Osiris is not the resurrection of the body. It's apotheosis. And practically every Egyptologist knows this. The resurrection of Osiris, because essentially, according to the myth, Osiris dies, he's chopped up, spread out all over Egypt. His sisters, Isis and Nephthys, collect the pieces, literally sew them back together with thread, and then they copulate with the corpse. And then they mummify the corpse and bury it. It's the spirit of Osiris when it ascends to the netherworld. At that point, it becomes apotheosized. And Osiris becomes a god of gold and iron with lapis eyes. That's the symbol of apotheosis. And Osiris is alive in the afterlife. And that's the sense in which they're talking about resurrection. Is they're talking in the sense that one lives in the afterlife. And basically that's your cyclical eternity, which is you're doing the same thing over and over and over again forever in the afterlife. So I think the claims that the resurrection narratives of Judaism, early Christianity, are influenced by the resurrection of Osiris, I think is nonsense. I think it's complete nonsense. It's not the same in any material way. I just don't see it. It's just totally different. And besides, the resurrection of Osiris is a narrative that developed over thousands of years. Christianity, it's in the same lifetime as Jesus Christ. So it's not in any ways the same. So, again, I think this is mythicist BS. So, with that said, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And we're going to have something upcoming on this. Okay, our next one here. All right, next one here is from Asin Weir, again, for $4.99. Thank you very much, Super Chat. Would there have been fish ponds and bird cages during the time of Adam and Eve? Why or why not?
No cages.
Well, considering it's very difficult to judge when the time of Adam and Eve were, it would be very, very difficult to answer this question. Now, with that said, bird cages and fish ponds are very old. We do know that the Egyptians had both, going all the way back to at least 3000 BC. So, yes, these, basically the penning of fish and the catching of birds into cages, very, very, very old. In fact, the archaeology of bird cages is even older than that, although it's hard to say exactly when the first fish pond was. But these go back, tens of thousands of years. So, could it be during the time of Adam and Eve? Probably not, because they were doing other things. But could have been very shortly after that somebody figured out how to do this. So, my intuition tells me that Adam and Eve would not have had fish ponds and bird cages, but their children and grandchildren very well could have, because already we see the domestication of livestock during the time of Cain. So, probably very, very quickly that this stuff happens. But could have been possible, but I would doubt it. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right, next one is a very controversial subject. That is... Okay. Asim Weir again for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are your thoughts on women in ministry? Are you complementarian or egalitarian? Oh boy. Talk about a subject that's going to get me in a lot of trouble fast. Although 95% of my subscriber base are men, so it probably wouldn't get me in that much trouble, but I probably would lose the remaining 5%. And sleep on the couch. Okay. Now, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to couch this in a way that's... I think it's like this. Okay, I am a complementarian. Okay, I'm not an egalitarian. And here's the reason why I'm a complementarian. Is you gotta let the men do something. Frankly. Okay? The fact is, when you have women in ministry, men tend to opt out. They tend to sort of check out. Men at that point don't participate at all. And already women have roles in ministry, even in, say, a complementarian framework. So here's the thing. I think women should be allowed to do certain aspects of ministry, such as teach. They should be allowed to teach. I don't think they should be elders. I don't think they should be head pastors. Okay, that's pretty much the limit of my complementarianism. It's not that I don't think women can do it. I think they're more than capable of doing it. I think they would be excellent at it. It's not the issue here is not ability. It's we have to keep men involved somehow. If men have no place in the church, because they've sort of checked out, then we've got problems. So that's my reasoning here for being complementarian is, something. Men have to do something to justify their role as head of the house, head of the church. While the ultimate head is Christ, there's also reflected here that the head over a woman is man. But again, it's not ability here that determines that. It's he's got to do something, and he has to step up to the plate.
Your ruler's God is.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you get to boss.
Yeah.
God doesn't treat us.
Yeah. And as my producer here points out, this is not so that men boss women around. Hardly. This is to be a good shepherd, a guide to raise holy children. So this is not for men ruling over women in an authoritarian way. It's so that everybody benefits in the process. The men benefit, by having proper Christ-like responsibility. Women benefit by having sound leadership. And the children benefit by learning that, because children get their image of God from their fathers. They get their confidence from their mothers. They get their image of God from their fathers. If the men aren't leading the church, the children see this and they say, well, who's this weak guy? Is that our God? So there's really important aspects to this. So that's why I'm a complementarian. But it doesn't come down to ability. This has nothing to do with ability at all. It has to do with other sociological factors. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And thank you for getting me into lots of trouble. Okay, next cut and paste here. Okay. Our next super chat again is from Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is a good layman-friendly resource debunking ancient aliens? Wow, that's a good question. There was back in the 70s, when, say, the ancient alien craze of Eric von Däniken was big. There was a theologian who wrote against the ancient alien things by the name of Clifford Wilson. He did a series of books that was called Crash Go the Chariots. Essentially, it was a response to the Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Däniken. And Eric von Däniken really sort of started this ancient aliens craze, or at least popularized it, highly popularized it. So, but Wilson's books were very good, at least a good lay resource for doing the whole ancient aliens thing. I don't know if anything recently has been written on this. It's sort of been the source of mocking, but it wasn't actually a I wouldn't say a good resource. I don't think there's been anybody who's really done a really good resource debunking ancient aliens in a long time. But that's probably the only thing that pops to mind is Clifford Wilson's books. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Almost at the end of the cut and paste process here. Okay, the next super chat here again is from Addison Weir. He's on a roll tonight for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Outside of being an exit strategy, what do you think of Ben Stanhope's book, Misinterpreting Genesis? Did he give good arguments against the Creation Museum? Now, I'll be very upfront here. I haven't read the whole book. I've only read snippets of it. Some of his arguments are very good. Some of his arguments are very interesting. Could people find alternatives to his arguments? Yeah, sure. Yeah. I don't doubt that the Creation Museum is problematic. It's problematic. Some of the approaches that are used by American young Earth creationism are definitely not good. So he's right about that. He's absolutely right about that. But I also am cautious too about sort of the extent to which he takes some of this. Sometimes he doesn't give the arguments the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time too, he's right on a lot of it. He's right on a lot of it. So, again, but that's only applies to some of the snippets I've read. I haven't read the whole book. So that's probably the extent of it. But, as far as being an exit strategy, I could see that coming a mile away. It was very obvious that was going to be an exit strategy for him. So, again, I think some of his arguments are very good. Some of them are very good. But some of them are also dubious as well. So at least I think there's a mix there. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And okay. Our next super chat is from Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is the expanse firmament Rakia in Genesis 1, 6-8 in reference to a solid dome, the water cycle, or something else? Okay. Well, that is a really great question. And let's go to Genesis. Let's just give it a quick read here. Genesis 1. Starting verse 6 here. Then God said, let there be an expanse. This is the Rakia. In the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse, the Rakia, and separated the waters which were below the Rakia from the waters which were above the Rakia, and it was so. Okay. The thought here is that this is a celestial ocean, essentially. That this was a ocean that was in the sky. And that the waters are being separated from that celestial ocean. So there's some waters that go up, some waters that go down and become the oceans. Okay. So that's sort of the thinking in ancient geography. But that there's still a sort of a dome of water that's in the sky above. Now, whether that is a solid dome, whether that's the water cycle, whether that's, say, the clouds, the overcast, is something that's sort of debated. So, we're really not sure because they're using analogical thinking here. They're using analogical thinking. They know there's when they go look down in the water, they know there's water below their feet. They see a blue sky up there and it goes, oh, well, there's obviously water above too. So it's hard to say exactly how that's being perceived to the ancient geographer. But it is an analogy. It is analogy. It's analogical thinking, and as such, it's going to be very, very hard to take that one too literally, as it were, because analogical language is like that. They're providing an analogy for something like what they think it is, based upon what they know. So they know a bit about oceans. So they're taking that and analogizing that to what's above their heads as well. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Uh, Thank you very much for the super chat. It's ultimately difficult to decide whether it's a solid dome, water cycle, or something else, because they're not exactly clear on this either. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, so that ends the cut and pasting. That was a lot of super chats. Wow. Surprised I missed those. Okay, our next super chat is, again, from Allison Weir for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. And by this point, he's clearly running out of money. Or he's almost got his book written. Something like that. And he says, sorry for overloading you with super chats. Laugh out loud. Well, don't apologize for that. There's no such thing as overloading us with super chats. And next week I'll probably regret saying that. There'll probably be some guy who puts in 100 super chats, and we'll just have to say, "Oh, we can't take them all." So there is such a thing as overloading us with super chats. But if that ever comes to the case, we'll just have to just say thank you, because there's actually a limit to how many we can address in a night. We typically take between 30 and 40 questions on these live streams, and we very rarely get more than that. So no need to apologize. We do appreciate the support, and we do love the questions. So thank you very much for the questions. Thank you very much for the super chats. We really, really appreciate it. Okay. Next one here is from Brick Creation for $5. Good to see you here tonight. Okay. And he asks, hello, Dr. Falk. Well, hello, Brick Creation. Is the resurrection of Jesus supernatural or paranormal? What's the difference? Okay. Very little, in fact. Supernatural is something that's, say, above what's natural. Okay. So, basically, the whole idea of gods, angels, demons, miracles, that would be something that's above the normal. So that's what's often called, why it's called supernatural. Now, paranormal is a little different. Para means beside. So it's something beside the normal. This would be more stuff along the lines of, say, spectral visitations, ghosts, unexplained phenomena like lycanthropy, psychic abilities, even some like alien visitations. That would be paranormal. So these are things that are not necessarily supernatural, but they're also not part of our normal life either, of our normal materialist life. So that's sort of the difference here. Now, in the case of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, what we're talking about here is something that's above the normal. It's basically Jesus raising himself, God the Father raising Jesus, and the Holy Spirit raising Jesus. So it's God raising Jesus in a miraculous kind of way. So this would be classified as supernatural, not paranormal. Because one of the things about something that paranormal, that's typically classified as paranormal, is something that it's unusual, but it's not unique either. It's something that's, you wouldn't say that, paranormal events take place a lot more often than, say, supernatural events. So that's sort of the difference between supernatural and paranormal, and how it would apply to the resurrection of Jesus. It's definitely, the resurrection of Jesus can be in no way construed to be normal. Dead people don't raise back to life. at least people who are not dead. I'm not talking about near-death experience. I mean dead. Dead buried in the ground and
3 days rotting.
3 days rotting. That doesn't happen. People in that state don't normally come back to life.
3 days rotting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we're not talking about something here about something that's paranormal. We're talking about something here that's supernatural. Okay, so as I said though, but the paranormal stuff, that's stuff that happens on, I wouldn't say it's not common, but it's also not unheard of either. It's not miraculous. You wouldn't see a figure of the Shadow Man and go, "Oh wow, I saw a miracle." No, you'd say you saw a Shadow Man. Okay. So there is a qualitative difference between what is supernatural and what is paranormal. But there can be overlap too. Okay? Some people would classify, for example, angelic visitations as both paranormal and supernatural. Again, not common, not unheard of, but also something that's above the natural as well. So there is a point where the two intersect, but they're also distinct categories as well. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, the next one here is from Brick Creation. Thank you very much for the super chat. He asks, what do you think the power of the holy people is in Daniel 12:7? Some say it's Torah, the strength of sin, 1 Corinthians 15:56, and it passed away in 70 AD. All right, let's pull this one up. Daniel. Chapter 12, verse 7. Okay. And I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, as he raised his right hand and his left hand towards heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be a time, for a time, and half a time, as soon as they finished shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. And the question was in verse 6, and one said to the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be until the end of these wonders? Now, these wonders are supposedly the events of the last days. And what really seems is that when we look at, say, the times and a half, basically the 3.5 years. Okay, this is the 3.5 years. Now, the siege of Jerusalem was not, 3.5 years. It was, I think, was it 2? I think it was 2, but I'd have to look. Either 2 or 4, I can't remember it. Let's see, siege of Jerusalem. It was 7 years. 7 years. Okay. So we're talking about here that it was a lot longer. It was a lot longer than the 3.5 years. This is just something that when we look at the eschatology, and I can understand why preterists would sort of have this kind of view, because they would be taking, say, the 77 or the 7, the last week, and basically then use that last week of Daniel to say that this was the Roman invasion of Jerusalem. Okay. But the other hand too is breaking the power of the people. And when you look at, say, verses like what you find in Revelation chapter 12, where it talks about the power, it does this 3.5 years again, and I think it's let's see, it's It's Revelation 12. Let's see here. Quick. Revelation 1. I talked about the 1200 days. Here it is in verse 14. And the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman in order that she might, and this is Revelation 12:14, in order that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for a time and times and a half a time, that's 3.5 years, from the presence of the serpent. Okay. Now, this biblical exegetes are going to look at go to Daniel 12:7. And in the commentaries I've read on this, they're basically all the major commentators basically have the same interpretation here. The power of the holy people is it uses here the word yod, hand, power, might of the holy people. In this case, it's a reference to Israel. So basically, what typically exegetes make of this passage is that God is using the power of the prince who is to come, the Antichrist, to break the will of Israel so that they come back to God. So that's what most exegetes are going to say the power of the holy people is. It's their will. It's their will fighting against God. And that the breaking of this is not Torah, it's not, say, the strength of sin, but it's pride. It's pride, it's basically rebellion against God. But it didn't pass away in 70 AD. That much I can tell you. Because anyone who's done any sort of apologetics ministry to the Jewish people today will understand that that's still there. That power of the holy people is still in them. So it's not done. And they couldn't come back to Christ yet, at least in accordance to Romans. And Romans basically said, God's not done with them. God's not done with the people of Israel. They're still going to, they still have a part of in the plan of salvation, because God's promises are never broken. God promised that they would be his people. And so God's still good for those promises. So I think that what we're talking about here is definitely that resistance to God. That resistance to God, that pride, that stubbornness. And Antichrist is going to be used by God to bring them back to him. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay, next super chat again is from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Does Matthew 23:29 mean, and I think 23:39 is what he corrected, mean that Jesus won't come back until Israel as a nation accepts him as Messiah? Would the second coming be a conditional prophecy? Interesting question. And thank you very much for the super chat. Let's do a quick read of Matthew here. Matthew 23 and 39. And this is okay. And let's start at verse 36 here. Truly I say to you, all these things shall come upon this generation, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. There's that power of the people. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. For I say to you, from now on you shall not see me until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Okay. This is the whole idea of conditional prophecy. It's very interesting, and it's a complicated subject all on its own. It's not necessarily that it is conditional, but there is a conditionality to it. And we just saw this in Daniel 12:7, where Christ won't come back until the work that he has orchestrated is done. And that work happens to be including the redemption of Israel. So there is a conditional status for this. And Heiser actually talks about this when he talks about, say, the fulfillment of the Gentiles. That Messiah won't return until the fulfillment of the Gentiles is complete. That there's a set number of Gentiles. And that the work of the forces of darkness is to delay that as long as possible, thinking that there is a conditionality to this. So the forces of darkness think if they can put this thing off, the fulfillment of the Gentiles, the completion of the Gentiles, as long as possible, i.e. indefinitely, then Christ won't return. So there is a conditionality to these end time prophecies. So there is a conditionality to all prophecy in some respect. The time has to be right. Now, we do have prophecies too that aren't conditional, that will just happen. But in the case of, say, eschatological prophecy like this, yeah, there's a conditionality to this, and certain things have to be met. Like, for example, when the abomination of the desolation stands in the holy place. Well, there has to be a holy place. Okay? There has to be a holy place for there to be that abomination that makes desolate. There has to be, there are certain conditions that have to be met for prophecy. And that's just the way it is. So, I think there is again a conditionality here that there will be a redemption of the Israelites too, of the Jews. So we know though that a lot of that won't take place until the Great Tribulation. Yes, I do take a futurist view of this. I'm not apologetic about that. I think there is a future. I think when we talk about this, we are talking about future events. Because as much as we preterists love the 70 AD for fulfillment of all this prophecy, there's things that just don't match and don't line up very well. So I would be very, very so while these are definitely conditional, because there are conditions that need to be met, a lot of prophecy is conditional. And you can just just chalk that up to when the conditions are right, God will act. And that's generally how he has worked through history anyway. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay, our next super chat here is from Cataphracт3 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. How historically plausible is Esther? Does the fact the Persian king is named give it more credence than a fictional account? Well, that's a good question. I haven't done as much reading on Esther as I should. Again, it's not a book I get into very often. There have been exegetes that have said there are some inconsistencies in Esther. I don't happen to know most of them off the top of my head. Like I think the number of satraps is there's some issue with that. But at the same time, too, we also have other books that attest to this as well. Like, for example, Mordecai. You know, the name Mordecai is both attested in Esther and it is in Ezra Nehemiah as well. So there's other things that sort of give credence to the historicity of Esther in general. But exactly when it takes place, which Ahasuerus is being mentioned here is still debated, I believe. But again, I'm not up on my Esther here, so you're gonna have to take a kind of vague answer here. But my leaning here is to sort of trust the historicity of this until I sort of have good reason to believe otherwise. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And again, I can't give you a really great answer on this because I'm not that familiar with the textual issues behind Esther. Okay. Now we're on to Twidget. Okay. And next question here is from Billy Ningen for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good evening, Dr. Falk. Well, good evening, Billy. I have a hypothetical question. Could I affirm the physical resurrection and not follow Christ? God bless. Absolutely. You know, it is completely possible to affirm the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ and not follow him. Completely. It's completely possible. People have done this throughout history. You know, people have affirmed the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ and just simply did not obey him. You know, the demons all know that the physical resurrection is true. They don't obey Christ. So it is completely possible to give intellectual assent to the resurrection and not trust in it for salvation. There are people out there who know it's true and just don't want to follow it. Yeah, you can convince someone that it's intellectually true and, you know, they don't want it. You know, they don't want it. So totally possible. It's happened through history many times. And it's not inconsistent. You know, yeah, you might be saying, okay, yeah, it's personally inconsistent, but people are funny that way. You know, there are people out there who will believe that Jesus Christ is, you know, their beliefs as far as Christianity are just right down the line of Christian orthodoxy, but they reject it. It's like, yeah, it might be true. I don't care. I'm going to do what I want. So, yeah, there's totally people out there like this. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's by no means a hypothetical question. It's a legitimate question, and people do it all the time. Okay, our next super chat here is also from Billy Ningen, it looks like, for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Dr. Falk, Jesus performed exorcism in the New Testament, but there was no exorcism in the Old Testament. Was there a disconnection here? What resources would you recommend for exorcism in ancient Israel? Ooh, very good question. Trying to think. I do recall that there was a book on that was a publication of a PhD dissertation on Second Temple period exorcism. I don't remember the title per se, and I don't remember who wrote it. But I recall reading a smattering of it some time ago, but I think it was done out of Dallas Theological Seminary. But um, there is evidence of exorcism in the Second Temple period. We don't see it so much in the Old Testament. We do see some demon possession in the Old Testament, interestingly enough. For example, Saul was vexed by a demon, by an unclean spirit. We do find other unclean spirits in the Old Testament. So it was there. It was present. It just wasn't sort of the... It didn't get center stage. So we don't see a lot of exorcism in the Old Testament. Whether that's maybe because it wasn't all that effective, who knows? In many respects, the coming of Jesus Christ was the solution to demon possession. And unfortunately, people before that just had to suffer with it. So there was attempts at exorcism before. It was not always all that effective. So this is probably why you don't see so much of it in the Old Testament, is people who had it just suffered with it. So anyway, that's sort of my take on this. Again, that dissertation is, if I run across it, I'll post it in the comments afterwards if I find it again. But I don't remember what the name of the dissertation is off the top of my head. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Polycarp Salavarieta. Wow. Sorry for butchering that. For $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, I'm going through Judges and 1 Samuel right now. Great books. It's not an easy read since there's a lot of characters. Any advice on how to navigate these books? Okay. In the case of Judges, you are dealing with a didactic book. It's a book that's it's written in didactic order from good judges to bad judges. Okay? So you are dealing with multiple accounts told in parallel in that book. So that's going to make, if you're going to read Judges as if it was a history, it's going to be very difficult to do that. Because you sort of have to reset the clock with every new judge, as it were. So that's going to be a challenge, dealing with a style of literature that is not so common here in the West. Now, 1 Samuel is going to be different because it sort of picks up where Judges left off. But it's more chronological. There's a lot of people in there, granted. But it should be easier to track. Now, you are going to get things in 1 Samuel where they sort of will add glosses and little explanations throughout of it that always aren't the most helpful for a Western reader, again, because of missing context. We don't have that context. So for us, their suggestions of the writer will not be so helpful. But you should have an easier time with 1 Samuel than you should with Judges. But that's sort of my thinking off the top of my head. Again, keep in mind that you're going to have to be, when you read these two books, you're going to have to be very, how do I say this? Attentive reading. Attentive reading. Attentive reading here is the key. You can't just sort of passively read this and turn your brain off. You sort of have to keep your brain mentally engaged as you work through each of these books. In Eastern Orthodoxy, they often say, let us be attentive before they do a biblical reading. Well, you have to be attentive as you read these books. You can't just read them passively. You have to sort of think about what you're reading as you're reading it. And if you do that, exhausting as it is, it'll be a lot more helpful. Trust me. Attentive reading is the key here to navigating through the Old Testament. And again, it's because you're having to compensate for a context that no longer exists and wasn't well recorded. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helps. But again, the key here, attentive reading, treat Judges like parallel history, and sort of, again, keep focused as you go through 1 Samuel. Thank you very much for the super chat, and I hope that helps. Our next super chat here is from Polycarp Salavaretia. I did butchered it again. Salavarieta. Sorry about that again. For $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is it true Jews in Jesus' time believed their soul couldn't live without the body? Everyone shares the same fate. Depends on the Jew. Okay, so some Jews, yeah, some like the Sadducees were basically they believed that once someone died, that was it. That's the end. They were a lot more akin to materialists than they were to, say, proper dualists. On the other hand, say the Pharisees, Pharisees, the Pharisees, they believed in a life after death. So they believed that the soul of the dead went down to Sheol. So, but most Jews in the time of Jesus did believe that people did descend to the same place, which is Sheol. But there was also a belief, too, in multiple compartments of Sheol. You know, Abraham, the place where Abraham was, versus, say, the place of, say, the not-so-good people. Essentially, the ones that were in rebellion against God. So you had two compartments in Sheol, and a lot of Jews did believe that in the Second Temple period. So it's going to depend on which Jew. You know, some will say that there's no life after death. Some say that everyone goes to Sheol, and that was sort of the typical view of they say, first century Judaism. So, but as to everyone sharing the same fate, oh no. There were those who believed that some were tormented and some were blessed in Sheol. You know, and being in the Abraham side of Sheol wasn't that bad. I mean, really, it was a place of comfort and personal healing. So it wasn't a bad place to be. So it wasn't true that they universally across the board that everyone believed the same fate. There was various opinions, essentially. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Okay. Angel WVM for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Do you know why in Leviticus 12, 1-5, if a pregnant woman gives birth to a female, it doubles the length of spiritual uncleanness compared to a male birth? Great question. Leviticus chapter 12, 1-5. Okay. There's our Bible here. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, When a woman gives birth and bears a male child, then she shall be unclean for 7 days. As in the days of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. Okay? So that's why a male. Okay? On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Then she shall remain in the blood of her purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until her purification is complete. The days of her purification are complete. But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her menstruation, and she shall remain in the blood of her purification for 66 days. Okay. And it continues on here. And when the days of her purification are completed for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the doorway of the tent of meeting a 1-year-old lamb or a burnt offering or a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. Then he shall offer it before the Lord to make atonement for her. Basically, this is ritual purification. And she shall be cleansed from the flow of her blood. For this is the law for her who bears a child, whether male or female. Okay. Now, we don't exactly know why it's double, except that in the case of, say, that purification of essentially there's sort of the idea here that the woman is not just doing purification for herself, but for her daughter as well, since the daughter is not going through circumcision. So it's abbreviated for the male child because of the circumcision. But in the case of a female child, there's no circumcision. So the purification period is double. And we're talking here about ritual uncleanness anyway. It's not really spiritual uncleanness, it's ritual uncleanness. So that's that whole sort of ritual cycle thing is going to play a large part of this. So she's doing, basically the mother is doing it on behalf of her daughter. So that's why it's doubled. Whereas the male child goes through circumcision. So that's why it's 66 days or 1 week, and for the various aspects of that purification ritual. So that's the long and the short of it, is that the male has his own purification process, whereas the female child doesn't. So anyway, that's the best I can probably give it to you here. There might be some other reasons that commentators have suggested. I haven't looked at those. But that's probably the best I can give you here as far as I can tell. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Wow. Very generous super chat here from Angel WVM here for $100. Wow. Thank you very much for that very generous super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. And he says, "Thank you so much, Dr. Falk, for all you've done. I've learned so much and will continue to learn from you. Congrats on 8,000 subscribers." Well, thank you so much. I hope the false prophet guy stopped prophesying. I hope he did too, honestly. I would not want to be a false prophet. God bless you, my brother in Christ. Well, God bless you also, you know. Yeah. He shouldn't have done that. He really shouldn't have done that. But, you know, I hope he stopped. I hope he stopped for his benefit. So, but anyway, thank you very much for the well wishes. I'm glad you've been learning from this channel, and that's why we did this. We did this so people learn about the Bible, gets excited about ancient Egypt and the cultures of the ancient Near East.
People would learn there are at least 3 years worth of evidence.
Yes. My producer said, and so people learn that there are at least 3 years of us doing videos on the evidence of the Exodus. So people learn that there is evidence for the Exodus. So anyway, I want to thank you so much for that really, really generous super chat. It does very much help our channel. It helps put food on our table to continue to bring these videos to you. We so appreciate it. Thank you so very much. It does really help us, and we so appreciate your support and well wishes too. And who knows? We might hit. I mean, we were really surprised how fast we made it to 8,000. We didn't expect it to come this quickly. So, we might hit that 10K more sooner than later. So, you never know. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, my widget here stopped, so I have to restart it. Let's see here. Get the widget going again. Here, let's make sure we didn't miss anything either. All right. Okay, and it looks like we did miss some stuff here. So, gotta do cut and paste again. Yeah, well, when Twidget decides to stop working, it does often drop things when it reconnects. Okay, so okay, and okay, so we'll turn off Twidget here. And okay, the next one here is from Mr. Rich B.O.B. for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Friedman is fond of saying that in the ancient Near East, veneration to statuary is passed on to the prototypes. Wheat for Dagon, wind for Enlil. Thoughts? I don't know about that. I'd have to see exactly what he says about this, but at first blush, I don't think it passed to prototypes per se. Because in the ancient Near East, they didn't have a nuanced approach to veneration. We got to be careful about that too. The whole idea of veneration happens a lot more in, say, the Christian era than it does in the pre-Christian era. In the pre-Christian era, you just had plain old idolatry, pure and simple. Yeah, it's a lot easier to fall into idolatry than into veneration. So, I think Friedman is probably wrong here on first blush. But again, not knowing his arguments, and I know Friedman can be very nuanced about his arguments, so I don't want to prejudge it too quickly. But at the same time, too, I don't think that veneration is the right framework to enter into this. And I certainly think that when it just comes for basically the transition from idolatry, I don't think it transferred to just, say, substituting wheat for Dagon or wind for Enlil. I think there's a lot more. Idolatry is a lot more persistent than that. I think if they really wanted to worship, I mean, Dagon was the god of wheat. So for him, I think they worshipped Dagon pretty much until it became unviable as a result of this Assyrian invasion of the coastal plain, when basically the Assyrians destroyed those Philistine cities just because they kept rebelling. So I sort of doubt that at least that doesn't happen until, I mean, I don't think they ended up ultimately worshiping wheat. So again, I'm highly suspicious of this just on first blush. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to have to do another cut and paste here. Okay, and our next super chat here is from Sentinel Apologetics for $10 Australian. Thank you very much. It's good to see you here tonight, Rob. Daddy Falk. Another comment by Dwayne Garrett on Exodus 3:2. Oh dear. The meaning of, and I have to look at this carefully because my Sine is uncertain. It may have cognates in Akkadian, Syriac, and Arabic, and there's a post-biblical term, Sinaya. Okay, thorn. Okay. Maybe. I'm not really sure what the meaning of it in Exodus 2 is, so let's look up Exodus 2. Exodus 3, verse 2. Look at that in the Hebrew here. Okay. Yeah, this is the bush, and it's Sine. Okay. Okay. So in the text, I'll pull up the Bible here. And Exodus 3:2 says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the blazing fire from the midst of a bush." And that's that Sinai. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with the fire, yet the bush was not consumed. Okay. Sure, it could be a thorn bush. Could be a tumbleweed. The semantic range of these terms is quite broad. So the meaning is Garrett is right here. The meaning is uncertain. Okay, but the context would seem to suggest it is a bush. Whether that's a thorn bush or not is another matter, but could easily be a bramble of some kind, or some sort of thorns. So again, that's not actually unreasonable. It's not an unreasonable thing to say here. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And the next one here, and he continues. With a second super chat. Continuation, so. And this is part 2 of the question. And it is most likely the plant, the Sinna, but elsewhere it refers to Sinai. Deuteronomy 36:16 for Samuel 14:4, Psalm 68:9. It may be that the plant was the basis for renaming Horeb as Sinai. All right, that one I doubt. Okay. All right, I have some doubts there. Deuteronomy 33. Let's go to 33. 33, verse 16. All right, and verse 16 says, "And with the choice things of the earth and the fullness and the favor of him who dwelled in the bush, let it come to the head of Joseph and to the crown of the head of the one distinguished among his brothers." Okay. Uh, again, this seems to be Bush, not Sinai, but all right. Let's go to, it's again not clear here. 1 Samuel 14, verse 4. And between the passes with which Jonathan sought to cross over to Philistine's garrison, there was a sharp crag on one side and a sharp crag on the other, and the name of it was Bozez, and the name of the other was Sanah. Okay, rock near Michmash. Sanah. Yeah, that's, we're still talking about Israel here, though. So I don't think this is a reference to Sinai. Because it'd be a very, very strange thing for Jonathan to do a campaign into Sinai. So yeah, that seems hinky. That seems really hinky. And finally, let's go to Psalm 68. 68, oops. Verse 9. Uh, 69. Thou didst shed abroad a plentiful rain, O God. Thou didst conform thy inheritance when it was purged. Somewhere else. Okay, oh, he's talking about verse 8, so he's probably using the Jewish numbering here. Yeah, okay. In the case of Sinai in verse 8, the earth quaked and the heavens dropped rain at the presence of God. Sinai itself quaked at the presence of God, the God of Israel. All right, now, in the case of Sinai here, we have a Samach, a Yod, a Nun, and another Yod. Whereas in Deuteronomy 33, when it talks about the bush, 16, we are talking here about a Samach, a Nun, and a Hay. No. No, I don't see that. Honestly. Okay. Uh, yeah. The Samach, and I will agree that the Samach and the Nun are suggestive, but do we have an early, let's see if there's an early incidence of Sinai too, because that might also help us. Yeah, we already see Sinai mentioned in Exodus 16 as part of the Exodus itinerary. So, yeah, I would doubt this. I would doubt this a lot. It's clear that the Israelites already knew this place as Sinai. So I don't think that the plant name is the basis for Mount Horeb at Mount Sinai. So yeah, I doubt this highly. I doubt this highly. It could be one of those false etymology things. But I mean, the fact is that Sinai is more likely to be connected to the wilderness of Zin than it is to be to Sanaa. So again, big doubts here. I think he's kind of stretching this one. I think this one's a stretch. Okay, so thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Complicated two-part question here, but yeah, I think we got to at least where I'm sort of at an area where I'm thinking that this is not viable. So thank you very much for the super chat, and it's really great to see you here tonight, Rob. Yeah, it's 68.8, not 9. But that could be a difference. Garrett might be using the numbering from, say, the Hebrew Bible, which tends to be off by 1 sometimes. Okay. Yeah, this is why you often have to look up and down verse 2, because it tends to be off. The numbering of the Masoretic text and the Christian Bible differs. Okay, next one here is from Michael Eternal. I'm going to need to cut and paste this one again. Okay, and okay. Oh, all right. Oops. Okay, our next super chat here is from Michael Eternal for $5 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, do you know what the early church fathers' views were on the age of the earth? Wow. I did look into this many, many years ago, and they tended to be all over the map, just like any of the early church fathers. Unless it was a clear matter of doctrine, opinions by the early church fathers in general don't have a lot of consensus. There are some early church fathers that hold to, say, the 7,000 year, say, prophetic cycle. The idea that that Christ was born in the 4,000th year of history. So you get church fathers that hold that view. But you also have some church fathers that hold to, say, the more Greek idea of the age of the earth, which was that it was 100,000 years old. So you get both. And generally, there's no consensus here as to it really wasn't an issue that they deemed that important. So, while there was some debate over what the age of the earth was, it didn't really matter to the church fathers terribly much. But you do see both views. You do see the 4,000 view. You do see the 125,000 year view. So, that's just something that, you're just going to see in the church fathers is a debate, essentially, of these various options. So they didn't hold hard and fast to this one. So it's going to depend on the church father and what his particular interests are. And frankly, most of them don't comment on this issue at all. You're only going to find snippet views here and there. So anyway, that's probably the best I can give you on answer on this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And it's really good to see you here tonight. Okay. Another super chat here. Is from Sentinel Apologetics. And it's for $2 Australian. Thank you very much, Rob, for that super chat. And he goes, I am both egalitarian and complementarian like a romantic dance. Well, a very non-committal and politic answer, for sure. But the context is more of women in ministry. And I think there is a sort of a basically a common sense middle ground that can be taken here. And I think that common sense middle ground has nothing to do with abilities. it has more to do with sociological functions and just how the church can continue to operate, um, and find a place for its men, essentially. So I think there's a lot. It's a tough debate because it is oftentimes wrapped up in misogyny, and I think that's really the wrong approach to take on. So yeah, there is something to be said that if you want to worship God, you got to do it God's way, and I think there is enough sufficient teaching here to show that there is a design for how the church is supposed to operate, and that design doesn't exclude men. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Now we're back to Twidget. Twidget has picked up from here. So our next super chat here is from Jack Ray for $50, and he says, "Pick a live chat." Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the super chat, Jack. Very much appreciated. It's very generous, and we really appreciate it. Okay, let's pick a live chat, and let's go for it. So, let's see here. What can we pick? Pick a non-super chat question. I might have to go and cut and paste one, because just truncated off all of them. Okay, so let's look back here. Oh, okay. I'll take this one here. I will take this one. By Gaius Octavius. And okay, do the switch out here. Okay. All right, this is going to be the sponsored chat from the live chat. Thank you very much to Jack Ray for sponsoring a question, and this is the one he's going to sponsor. Okay, why does the Bible not mention Merneptah's battle against Israel, and why did Yahweh allow him to emerge victorious over the Israelites? Okay. Well, one of the things that is clear about Merneptah's battle against Israel is he's not actually. We would expect if Israel had completely conquered the promised land, at least the portion that they were assigned to conquer, that Merneptah would have encountered a lot more of the Israelites. Now, it's because the Merneptah Stela not only mentions the Israelites, it also mentions the Hurrians, which is very interesting because that's sort of the leftovers of the Mitanni Empire. So this is taking place after the Mitanni self-destruct, and as the Israelites are just entering the Promised Land. So there's a couple reasons why the Bible would not mention this. First reason is it's really not relevant to the conquest narrative. The conquest narrative is again, it's a piece of didactic literature. It would have happened during the lifetime of Joshua. So we do know that some Israelites during the time of Joshua were sort of spread out as they were, doing their conquest. So Merneptah's battle against Israel is probably some of those Israelites that are on the sort of the outskirts of the conquest. So he's not encountering the main body of Israelites here. He's more or less um, encountering somebody on the fringe. It's also probable that when Merneptah went to war in Israel, in Canaan, that his real target was Gezer. That's most likely why he went on campaign, was to go up against Gezer. Because Gezer was being, at that point, ruled by a Canaanite king who was essentially attacking Egyptian watch stations, essentially garrison towns. So Merneptah was apparently going into Canaan, and he takes the route up the coastal plain. So he's fighting against the Philistines, and then comes back down the Shephelah. So he's not going into the Judean foothills where the Israelites are. He's going down into the Shephelah. He's encountering a few agricultural settlements, and his target is Gezer. So the for the Bible, they're trying to show you here in the organization of Joshua. Basically, the whole book is organized according to tribes. Essentially, which tribes are faithful, which tribes are unfaithful, and become stinking idolaters. So Merneptah's battle doesn't really fit into that good tribe, bad tribe narrative that the writer of Joshua is trying to convey here. So that's the most likely reason why it's not recorded, because it's just not relevant to what the sort of the didactic message, the teaching message that the author of Joshua is trying to communicate. We see this in other places too. Now there are some events that are really to modern historians would be very relevant. And this is not the first time. This is not the only time it happens in the Bible. Like, for example, the Battle of Karkar, probably one of the greatest military victories Israel ever had, and it was done in a coalition of Ahab that was basically Ahab participated in, and Ahab's coalition defeats the Assyrians. Big battle, very famous. We only have record of it from the Syrian sources. But then again, too, the Syrians are chronicling historical events. Again, from their particular biased perspective, but still, they're chronicling those events. The Israelites are not so much interested in that. They're really more interested in showing Ahab was a bad king. He was an idolater. He was an unfaithful king. So they're much more, the writers of Israelite literature are much more interested in what these narratives teach than, say, exactly preserving every detail of history for posterity's sake. So it comes down to this. What's the reason for recording something? Why is it important? It's a reception history. It's reception history. It's placing history in a certain ideological framework. So that's the reason it's not mentioned. It's just simply not mentioned because it's not of their interest to what they're trying to communicate. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. I want to again thank Jack Ray for sponsoring that question. We really appreciate the generous super chat, and we also appreciate, helping out each other on the live chat too. So, this gives everyone sort of the opportunity to learn new things. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat here is from BC for $2 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Oh, House of Uncle, of David, or of Kettle? Oh boy. Winky face. He's talking here about the Teldan Stela. Ah, boy. Wow. There are people who, when that thing was first discovered, and it was discovered in situ. Here's one of the amazing things about that particular Stela. That thing was beautiful. I mean, the writing on that is so beautiful. It's not even funny. If it had been on the antiquities market, it would have been deemed a fake instantly. It looked too good. It looked too good. But it was found on an excavation. Excavation. It was found on Teldan in situ, so there was no question it was genuine. Now, with that said, there have been a whole bunch of people that have tried to provide alternative meanings for David, and I think it's preposterous. House of the Kettle, really? I know that one was one of the most absurd ones, honestly. Yeah. Absolutely absurd. Um, yeah, it was very good for a laugh. Yeah. Um, Fairman used to say about translation, if a translation doesn't make sense, then it's nonsense. House of the Kettle is nonsense. Yeah, so it's definitely House of David. Definitely. I mean, just anything else there is just sort of straining the gnat. And it's not even in a broken piece of text, so you can't even say, "Oop, the hand slipped." So it's just, yeah. So I'm gonna call rubbish on that House of the Kettle translation. It's definitely House of David. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and thank you for the laugh. Okay. Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Wow, you've been on a roll tonight. I see you found some extra change in the piggy bank. It's like you're a high roller tonight. Very much appreciated, though. Thank you very much. All those contributions do help us to support this channel, and we do very much appreciate it. Oh yeah, when yeah, uh, especially since our two hard drives broke, that's an expensive repair. Yeah, very expensive repair to fix two hard drives at once. So we do, in all seriousness, really appreciate the super chats. Okay, and he says, in your opinion, does the Bible teach eternal conscious torment? The fiery descriptions of hell, literal or figurative, why or why not? Okay. There's a couple of questions here. I think the Bible teaches eternal conscious torment. Okay. And I think it teaches it because it also teaches eternal conscious bliss. When we look at, say, the statement in the book of Revelation of heaven, it says that, it'll be forever and ever. Forever the ages, quite literally. And everyone agrees that is eternal conscious bliss. I don't think there's anyone here who disagrees, who's a believer or an exegete, that the Bible teaches eternal conscious bliss in the afterlife. Okay, it's almost a ridiculous thing to even say that. Oh, well, the Bible doesn't teach eternal conscious bliss. Nobody would say that. It's just, it would be even sounds even strange to say that. Eternal life? No, it's not eternal. It's just life for a long time. Then you're dead for good. So what we've done here is we've done a reductio absurdum here argument. Basically, we've reduced this argument to absurdity, saying that annihilationism is a valid proposition. Because when it's also using just a chapter before, basically saying that the fires of hell will last, the people will be tormented day and night forever the ages, is being used in the exact same way as people who are living the life eternal in the very next chapter. So I think there's no doubt to the question of eternal conscious torment. If the former is eternal and never stops, then the latter is eternal and never stops. And that's just common sense exegesis. Now, the fiery descriptions of hell, literal or figurative, that's a different question. Okay? I would place it more along the figurative line. There isn't really a fire going that is oxygen combining with fuel to make flames. Or if you take a more solar analogy here, atomic fusion going on, and it's roasting you through radiation and solar heat. Okay, so I don't think those descriptions of a fiery hell are, say, literal. So there's not real fire. Hell's real, but not the fire of it is not itself literal. What I think is going on, though, is what we have in hell is holiness. God's holiness radiating through hell. And for a person who has a body that's conformed to their image and their own sinfulness, where people have decided to pay the price for their own sins, that is going to burn. That's going to be torment, whether or not it's a literal or a figurative fire. That is the essence. That is the essence of torment, is God's holiness being unrestrained upon the rebellious, those who have rejected salvation in Jesus Christ. They will be resurrected. They'll be given an eternal body, just like the redeemed are. And they will be experiencing the holiness of God. So that's where I think the torment comes in. So anyway, that's my thinking here on hell. I think the Bible does teach eternal conscious torment. I think people today are uncomfortable with this. And I think they're uncomfortable with this because we've become a multicultural society that has become, very uncomfortable with the whole idea that God can be just. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And thank you for all your help tonight. I mean, you've helped us tremendously tonight, and we so very much appreciate it. Okay, that's interesting. Pablo Marquez comments, David Falk being Eastern Orthodox straight. Well, don't get ahead of yourself here, but but if they're right on something, I'll acknowledge it. Sure, absolutely. If the Eastern Orthodox are right on something, I'll be more than happy to acknowledge it. Hey, if Roman Catholics are right on something, I'll acknowledge that too. If the fundamentalists are right, I'll acknowledge that too. We don't care what the denomination is. We just care that they get it biblically right. If they get it biblically right, then it's worth commenting on and basically saying, hey, these guys get it right. And I think, yeah, Eastern Orthodox have got this one straight. Okay, so next super chat here. is from Andrew Mansour for $10 Canadian. Thank you very much. Happy Orthodox Feast of the Nativity. Well, happy Orthodox Christmas to you too. That is tomorrow, I believe. So that should be very, very interesting. Uh, yeah, it's very interesting to understand that there's two Christmases. I do some work in retail to pay the rent, and there's a lot of people who are still buying Christmas ornaments. Even at this point in time, and my boss came up to me and goes, "It's like days after Christmas, why are people still buying ornaments for Christmas?" I said, "Well, Eastern Orthodox Christmas is right around the corner, January 7th." So he didn't know that. And anyway, he says, "Were the three wise men magi's from Persia or kings? Uh, do we know exactly where they came from? If they were kings, they didn't bring security with them?" Okay, I think they're astrologers. I don't think they're kings. As much as the song "We Three Kings of Orient" are, they weren't kings. They weren't kings. Now they might have been aristocracy, but they were probably astrologers. Were they from Persia? Likely. I think that would be probably the best guess. At least at the point where Persia became Parthia. So now, were they Zoroastrian? That's another question altogether. Zoroastrian scholars apparently don't think that they used astrology in this way. Again, I don't know for sure. It's not my field of specialization, and I'll admit that fully. But I don't think they were kings. And the Bible doesn't say they were kings. But we don't have any idea exactly where they came from, other than it says they were from the East. Okay, so we know they were from the East. East in the sort of you're talking as far as biblical geography goes. You're talking Syria, Mesopotamia. So that's typically what the Bible says refers to when it talks about the East, which is that east along the Fertile Crescent. So Syria and Mesopotamia, essentially. So I don't think they brought security with them. I think that would have gone super noticed. You walk into Roman Jerusalem with a big security detachment. Yeah, someone's going to get an idea here. And kings very rarely left their countries of rulership, just because the incidence of a palace coup was so high. So anyway, well, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and that's probably the best I can give you here, because again, I'm not a New Testament scholar. I have limited knowledge here, but that's as best as I know of it. Addison Weir again for $9.99. Wow, thank you. And he says, "My family and I could really use your prayers. Our dog's kidneys are failing her, and it's really hard to get her eat. We don't think she has much time left." Okay, absolutely. We would be happy to pray for you. And oh, Jack Terrier, how sweet. Uh yeah, they're family. Pets are family. I know when we don't have dogs, we have rabbits. And we absolutely adore our rabbits. And we do consider them like family, so it's really hard to lose a pet. So absolutely, we'll be praying for you and your family. We also would encourage the people in the live chat also to pray for them. And again, thank you for your support tonight, and we will keep you in our prayers. So thank you and blessings. Sentinel Apologetics again for $10 Australian. Well, thank you very much. Let's see, what does Rob have to get me in trouble with this time? On Daniel's 12:7, Carol Newsom says, quote, the phrase Napeshiad, shatter the hand, is from the Akkadian idiom kata nata, napasu, to push back the hand for repudiation of treaty relations, covenantal rejection, end quote. Interesting thought. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Possible. Yeah, possible. I wouldn't say this one's impossible. But yeah, the commentaries I read were breaking the power of. So, but every commentary is different, and various commentaries will have different views on this. And this one's an interesting one. I'll have to admit that this is an interesting one. I have not heard this one before of pushing back the hand as a covenantal rejection. It's an interesting, provocative view, though. I'm intrigued by this. So definitely, very interesting, and thank you for mentioning this. This is an interesting point of view. Okay, Andrew. Next one here is from Andrew the Mansour for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Julian the Apostate and the Jews tried to rebuild the temple. Fire came out of the ground. If they tried to rebuild, what would be considered the end? Would that be considered end of days? Well, no. We really have only one affirmative sign of the end times. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there that do newspaper prophecy and try to read the tea leaves. And I'll find this verse for you. Let's see here. And the only, like, for example, we hear the roar from the Gospels, people using the wars and rumors of war, famines and pestilence in diverse places as signs of the end. And really, the Bible is basically saying, no, those aren't signs. Those aren't signs of the end times. Those are just things that are going to come. So I think a lot of people mistaken the signs of the end times. Now, I think that the rebuilding of the temple is necessary for the end times. At least the final days. Because we have to be cognizant of the fact is that the Bible also considers every time basically starting at, say, the ascension into heaven as being final days. Everything post-resurrection is final days, is the end days. So we are kind of living in a kind of eschatological time. But the rebuilding of a temple wouldn't itself constitute a end of days, although it is necessary to lead up to, say, the last days. The only definitive quality event that has to happen for the end days to be triggered is actually in 2 Thessalonians 2. Okay, and verse 3. And it says, let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Okay. Now, this is the important exegetical key here, is that apostasy that you see highlighted in yellow there. That is the Greek term apostasia. It means falling away. When the church falls away, That's what's going to trigger the end. We see that right now. So we're already living in a time where it could qualify. That's the only qualification here, is that the apostasy happened. That's the only sort of sign that we are given that the end days are near. Okay? Apostasy comes first, then the man of lawlessness is revealed. The Antichrist is revealed. And he doesn't only just, reveal himself. He exalts himself inside the temple, trying to display himself as God. That's going to be a very, very... That's when you sort of go, okay, the clock started at this point. So the temple, rebuilding of the temple alone is a necessary condition for the end of days. But that temple could be built, and 200 years from now, the man of lawlessness could still be revealed. So, anyway. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that sort of clarifies this a bit. Andrew Benser again for $5 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Opinion on Jordan Peterson giving Bible studies when he doesn't even consider himself a believer or questions the existence of God. Is he a Gnostic? Well, I tend to have a very narrow definition of what constitutes a Gnostic. So I don't think he's a Gnostic, but he's definitely viewing this through anachronistic, secularist eyes. His approach to Bible studies is very Jungian. So he's very big on archetypes, on psychology, on kind of mythologizing of the texts. And I think he's often wrong. Okay. I understand he's helped a lot of people. I think he says some good things. But I think when it comes to Bible studies, I think they're not very good. I had problems with his series on Genesis. His current series on the Exodus is right now behind a paywall, and I ain't willing to pay it. So I'm not gonna watch it until I can get a hold of a copy that's not behind a paywall. But on the other hand, I don't think his expertise lends itself very well to Bible studies. I know he's very fascinated with the Bible. He's incredibly fascinated by the Bible. I just don't think he's very good at it. And he's definitely a Jungian psychologist and is applying that framework to the constructs in the Bible. And that's just so anachronistic it isn't even funny. Yeah, brick creation. Agnostic or agnostic? Yeah, that's a good question right there. I'm not sure where he stands, and I don't think he even knows where he stands on his belief in God. Is he a Gnostic? Is he an agnostic? Who knows? He's probably not a Gnostic. I mean, Gnostics are... you could make a case that he uses a lot of allegory here in his interpretations, but there's more to a Gnostic than just allegorical method. You have to have more of an anti-materialist view of the world. Basically, you have to repudiate the physical world and basically extol the spiritual instead. So I don't think he's a Gnostic. He could be agnostic, as in somebody who is not sure about belief in God. That's possible. But again, I don't think even he knows. But I don't think his biblical exegesis is very good, especially when it comes to Exodus. So So anyway, with that said, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Yeah. My producer says, the only reason he's not a Gnostic is because he doesn't think you can be saved by it. That's one thing about Gnostics. They do believe in secret knowledge to be saved. And I'd say that if he's a Gnostic, he isn't a very good Gnostic. Okay, Leiko for $10 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom, Falkers. Well, Shabbat Shalom to you also. Congratulations on the 8K. Well, thank you very much. May it be multiplied like stars and sand. Well, thank you. Question. Was the divine name used before Exodus 6:3? Thank you. Okay, that is an interesting question. And the answer to that question is, we don't know. There is a potential that it was used before in the region of Midian by essentially the area of Edom. So there is some suggestion, and this is the so-called Kenite hypothesis, that Yahweh, the divine name, was brought to the Israelites by Moses. And I think that's probably the best explanation we have for it. So that would necessitate that it was being used, at least by the Midianites, prior to Moses' encounter in Exodus 6:3, which is the burning bush. So I do think that it was used before. Do we have any records of it? No, we don't. None of the seal impressions that we have from Edom, which are generally date to the 7th, 8th century at max, at oldest, don't have any Yahweh names. We don't find Yahweh names. We do find Yahweh names in, say, steel impressions from the Judean foothills, definitely, but none of them are predate Exodus 6. None of them predate the say the 9th century. So we don't have a lot of extra biblical attestations of Yahweh prior to the Mesha Stela. Mesha Stela is really the so-called Moabite stone. That's the oldest attestation that we have of the name Yahweh. The oldest extra biblical attestation, I should say. So that's sort of where we are with that. But I think too that it probably would have been used prior, even if we don't have that attestation at the moment. But you never know. The shovel can turn, and we can get a whole new text that blows our minds as to what was actually written and what people actually believed. So people are still discovering stuff. So we are by no means at the end of knowledge here. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay, Michael Eterno for $2 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, can you explain Luke 14:26? Thanks for answering. Let's look up Luke 14:26. Luke 14:26. All right. And this is Christ. He's basically saying, and he's talking, the context here is that people are coming to him, and he's giving them hard sayings. Okay? He's giving the Jews tough sayings. Verse 25. Now great multitudes were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe him began to ridicule him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or, verse 31 continues, or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and take counsel whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter the one coming against him with 20,000? Or, whilst the other is still far away, he sends delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, no one of you can be my disciple who does not give up all his possessions. All right. That's the pericope here of what's happening in Luke 14:26. Okay? But what Christ is saying here is you might have to give it all up for the gospel. Okay? The gospel comes at a high price. Yes, you're going to get eternal life, but you're going to get suffering in this world. The one promise that Christ made that seems to be absolutely true. You will have suffering if you follow me. You have suffering in this world because they hated the master, they'll hate the servant too. And that's what he's saying us. He's saying that you can't love your father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters or your own life more than Christ. Now, you are supposed to love them. Okay? You are supposed to love them. But you can't love them at the expense of Jesus Christ. You cannot give up Jesus Christ because you love your parents want you to give him up. You can't love your parents that much that you would give up Christ. You have to be prepared for that. And he's basically, what Christ is doing here is outlining the costs of discipleship. The high price, the high cost of discipleship. Very high. You follow Jesus Christ, you will have suffering. You will have tribulation. People will hate you. And the more obedient you are, the more they will hate you. You know, this is just a truth of the gospel. And he's given these people who are following, because a large amount of people were following Jesus. You know, it says in the previous verse, great multitudes were going along with him. Okay, he was having a large following, and he's basically telling them, "Hey, this is not an easy ride. This is not a populist movement. You know, if you follow me, you're gonna end up with trouble, lots and lots and lots of trouble." So he's just basically, you know, telling them the price of lending here, the cost of lending. You know, he's giving them the goods straight up before they get too far into this. Because, you know, Christ does not want them to be like that guy who builds a tower and didn't consider the cost. And then is laughed at because he couldn't finish. It's also, I mean, the early church also viewed this as well, as my producer just brought up here, as to like the catechetical school in Alexandria used to require that people did 3 years of training in Christianity because of what was about to come up for them. So there is something to be said that you shouldn't enter into Christianity lightly. It's a commitment. It's the I think one of the biggest problems we have in, say, evangelism is easy believism. Where we outline all the benefits of Christianity and tell them none of the negative. That leads to weak, vapid followers. Because as soon as someone gets cancer, they fall apart. As soon as somebody has a turn in their job, they fall apart. They haven't been prepared for persecution. And this is what Christ is doing here. He's preparing them for persecution. The Christian life isn't easy. It's hard. It's very, very hard.
Easy, you're not.
Yeah. I mean, if your Christian life is easy, you might not be doing it right. Just saying. So, yeah, it's tough. It's hard. Now, this is not to say that there are times of blessing in the Christian life, but there's also times of tribulation and persecution. And that's what Christ here is trying to suggest, that there is a time of persecution here. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that explains what's going on here in Luke 14:26, is that essentially Christ is preparing his people to know the cost of discipleship. All right. The next question is from Jack Ray for $10. Thank you very much. And he says, please answer this question from Pablo Marquez. What is your view on Freemasonry? Okay. Well, it's not Christian. It's not Christian. Essentially, Freemasonry is a secret society that tries to entangle both a mutual support network with religious constructs. And those religious constructs are very, very troubling. One of those religious constructs is the idea that there is truth in all religions. This is antithetical to the message of Christianity. In fact, Christ calls all those who came before him robbers and thieves. That they are agents that worked against the gospel of Jesus Christ. So, as a Freemason, you have to accept the idea that the Hindu is as equally saved as the Muslim, the Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, the Christian, the agnostic, the atheist. They're all equally saved. It's a kind of universalism. And it's a universalism that also combines rituals and secret knowledge. It's similar to Gnosticism in some respects. Okay? It does place a high allegorical reading on, say, the Bible. So it teaches its members that you read the Bible and all scriptures of all religions allegorically. And they're all, like, for example, the famous Freemason analogy here is that there is a diamond. And every religion is a facet on the diamond. No facet has the complete truth. And all the facets are equally valid. I think this is really, really problematic if you are a Christian. I don't think you can be a Christian and a Freemason at the same time. I think there are people who do try to navigate between the two just because the business network is so important to them. But it's done at the highest expense possible. So I can't see Freemasonry being compatible in any way with a biblical worldview. So anyway, I hope that helped. I hope that helps in the message. Thank you very much for sponsoring that question. Very, very much appreciate your support of the channel tonight. You've been very generous to us, and we are much greatly appreciative of that.
And thank you to the person asking.
And we also want to thank Pablo for asking that question as well. So, with that said, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat and the question. Okay, historical strategy gaming for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. When was Asa king of the kingdom of Judah, and who is Zerah of the Cushites? Interesting question. Okay. Now, a couple things we have to get going here. Let's just bring up Asa's dates. And I am using Groundhog here to look this up. It'll just be a second here, because I don't remember his dates off the top of my head. So, Asa's dates. Find it here. Are from 910 BC to 869 BC. So that's the dates when he ruled. So we're talking in the 9th, 10th century. So that's the dates for Asa. Now, who is Zerah of the Cushites? Now, the question is it Cushites here or is it Kishites? It's going to be an issue. We do know that Zerah was, let's see, let's look up Zerah. Zerah of the Cushites, I believe. We aren't talking about. Find the verse here. Let's see. Cushites. All right, do we have a verse for that? Because that would make things a lot easier for me to look this up. So, uh, okay, 910. Let's look up the Egypt here. 'Cause I can't. I'm not at the loss to find that verse for the moment. So, yeah, I can't seem to find that verse for the moment. But anyway, let's look up who was in charge of Egypt at the time of Asa. 910. We are here. Yeah, not the Kushite, not the see, that's the reign of Osorkon the First. Osorkon the First reigns from 925 to 890. Okay. Okay, so you're not talking Zerah the Kushite. You're talking Zo, I think. Yeah. Okay. That's Second Samuel 18:20 verse 21. Okay. So the Cushite is not Zerah. Okay. All right. Okay. Now we're sort of now we're playing with fire here. Okay. We're playing with gas. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Okay. So what we were talking about here is Osorkon the First. Okay. So the Cushite, that's Osorkon the First, and his dates are, say, compatible with Aza. Okay, so is the nickname for Osokon. Okay, so Osorkon the First is the guy here. So um, now the thing with Osorkon is to be from Kush is is it's we're not talking Dynasty 25 here. We're talking Dynasty 22, at least the early 22nd dynasty. Okay, and indeed, the Kushite dynasty had not been established yet. Now, there is some question about the origins of Osorkon the First. He was the uncle of Shishonk the First, and in some respects, it is suggested that he was from Upper Egypt. So he establishes himself at Tanis as part of that Libyan dynasty that comes about. But at the same time, too, he is not part of that Theban dynasty. So you did have in Dynasty 22 sort of trading off between, say, independent Egyptians that established themselves and the Libyans, essentially. So we're in the right middle here of the Libyan dynasty. So Osokon the First certainly could have been a Kushite. We're not exactly sure. Okay, but he also could have been a Libyan as well. But at the same time, too, it's very, very clear that so the Cushite of 2 Samuel 20 or 18 verses 20, 21 is a reference to Osorkon the First. Okay, so that's going on here. We're talking late 10th, early 9th centuries BC, and the reign of Aza does overlap with, say, the reign of Osokon the First. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Now that I got a better idea of the question, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Again, we're not exactly sure of the origin of Osorkon the First. He does seem to establish his kingdom sort of independent of the Libyans, but through the cooperation of the Libyans. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Let's see. Okay, we got a few more super chats here, and then we're probably going to call it a night because we have been going on for 3 hours. Okay, Ron the Exegete for 10. I think it's Romanian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. What do you think is the weakest point of the late Exodus? Okay. The weakest point is always going to be the lack of textual sources, and I think that's probably going to be true of whether you're talking Exodus or of any kind. Is we just don't have a good preservation of the textual sources during that period. That's because the Exodus is taking place from the Nile Delta. There's very few texts that survive the Nile Delta. The Delta region is just has really terrible conditions for preserving of sources. We find this even in places that are seemingly well preserved, like the excavations at Tanis. Very, very poor preservation of a lot of things there. Again, it's that high groundwater that just destroys stone and text alike. We're lucky to have a few texts from Tanis, but not very many. Very few survived. So that's going to be the weakest point of any Exodus theory, is going to be just the lack of textual sources that survive in the archaeological record. So with that said, however, we have a lot of other evidence that we can sort of go with, which is the archaeological evidence, the internal evidence in the Exodus account itself, the route of the Exodus, the toponymy. All those are basically pointing to a late Exodus date. So fortunately, we got a lot that's in favor of the late Exodus. But again, the weakest point is going to be the lack of textual sources. We just have a difficult time dealing with the fact that not much has survived. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that answered the question. And it looks like our final super chat here is from Sentinel Apologetics from Rob for $5 Australian. Thank you so much for that super chat, and thank you for sticking it out with us tonight. Very much appreciate that. And he says, Garrett on Exodus 23, verse 3, says, "You shall have no other gods in my face." Note the use of El Panay in 1 Kings 9:7. Thus the idiom "in my face" here. Actually, he's not wrong. He's not wrong on this either. Basically, it is before my face. That's what El Panay means. So that's in your face is not such a bad translation, to be honest. Now, with that said, where is the face of God? And that's one of the interesting things about this is, in a very sort of restrictive way, the Ten Commandments and the tabernacle are coinciding. So, in the restricted sense, it's basically saying you don't put any idols in the tabernacle. That's essentially, that's the narrow reading of the passage. But the commandment to "you shall have no other gods," in my face, well, God is everywhere. So if we have to understand that when the Ten Commandments were written, the Israelites believed that God was a localist deity, that Yahweh could be in only one place at one time, like other deities of the ancient Near East. In fact, it's safe to say that in the late Bronze Age, everyone was a localist. Everyone believed that their gods could be in only one place at a time. One place at one time. That was the ubiquitous belief of mankind in the late Bronze Age. So you get this commandment that you shall have no other gods, in my face, before my face here. And, the Israelites are probably thinking, okay, yeah, no idols in the temple. And then they start really thinking about this whole tabernacle thing and what the symbolism of the Ark of the Covenant means. And they start coming to realize that Yahweh's not a localist deity. He can be everywhere. Well, okay, now you've completely changed the complexion of Exodus 23. The inference then becomes, well, if God's everywhere and he can see what you're doing, then it's just no other gods, period. It loses its restrictive nature. So, yeah, it was a commandment that, on later reflection, was proven to be a lot more broad than they anticipated. So it's a very interesting how that developed. And frankly, the Israelites struggled with idolatry. absolutely struggled with it. You know, they're not in the Holy Land in Canaan for one generation before they're back worshiping idols. You know, not even one generation. So they are always going to have difficulties with this. So anyway, it is an interesting reading, and I agree with the reading. I think he's spot on here. And I think there is something to the that's the English idiom in my face. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, I even wrote an article on this once. So um, that basically that sort of portion got kind of cut out because they didn't like the implications of this. But hey, that's not that's not my problem. So anyway, with that said, however, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And I'm glad you could join us tonight. Now, I am going to take a couple of non-super chats because it's getting late. I want to get to bed at some point. And I'm just going to if it's here in Twidget, I'll take it. I probably won't cut and paste it if it was early. So we're going to look at later non-super chats at this point. So I'm going to take 2 non-super chats. If I don't find any, we're going to call it a night. So
We could ask
oh, okay. Is it here? Let's see if I can find it here. Chowie. Okay. Chowie. How prominent is Eastern Orthodoxy in Vancouver? Not very. That's the long and the short of it. Is there's very few Eastern Orthodox churches in Vancouver. Local to me here, there is a Ukrainian Orthodox church. There's a couple of, say, Greek Eastern Orthodox churches in Surrey, I believe. But there's not very many. There's not very many. There's not much Eastern Orthodoxy in, say, Western Canada. You do find it much more prevalent in the prairies. So places like Saskatchewan and Manitoba, there's a lot more Eastern Orthodox there. There's also a lot more Eastern Orthodox in Toronto. In fact, you'll even find the various kinds of Orthodox all over Toronto. So it's not something you find a lot of in Vancouver. You find a lot more in Vancouver. You find a lot more mainline Protestantism and Roman Catholicism than you'll find Eastern Orthodoxy. So it's not. There's some Eastern Orthodoxy here, but not much. Not much. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. It is an interesting question, but yeah, it's Vancouver's a port city. It's a port city. We actually have a lot more Sikhism. A lot more Sikhism, a lot more Islam, a lot more Hinduism, a lot more Taoism, and say Buddhism than we have Eastern Orthodoxy in Vancouver. So that sort of gives you sort of the lay of the land here is that we're very cosmopolitan. We're a port city. Vancouver's a port city, and it's a very multicultural port city. And most people who live in Vancouver are immigrants. They're not native to Vancouver. Native Vancouverites only account for about 17% of the population of Vancouver. So most people who live in Vancouver weren't born here. So there's a huge amount of complexity when you have a port city of this nature. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the question, and very much appreciated. Okay. Oh boy. All right. I will take that question, and this will probably be the final question of the night. And comes from Francis Dodds. Hey, Dr. Falk, I've recently come across Palestinian Arab historians that deny the historicity of ancient Israel. What do you think of these texts and their prevalence? Not much. Palestinian and Arab historians have a ideological axe to grind. And the fact is that the history of ancient Israel is really... people still debate the Exodus. But the history of Israel after the 12th century BC is pretty much beyond question at this point. We do know that there were Israelites in Israel. Thank the Merneptah Stela for that. We do know that there were Israelite settlements all over the Judean foothills, starting in no later than the mid-11th century. We also know that there was a monarchy in Israel that were composed of Israelites. We have their names recorded in both the Bible and in extra biblical texts. You know, the Moabite stela is a big example of this. The Tel Dan stela. We have Yahweh names on seals in Israel. You know, so the history of historicity of ancient Israel is not contested by credible sources anymore. It really isn't. It's pretty incredulous. It's pretty incredulous to make those statements. But they are making those statements for ideological purposes. So those particular historians are not without bias. So I'm pretty much that's pretty much my opinion on that. I don't think that's serious history, and no historians take that seriously. You know, you might get some mythicists that take that seriously, but you know, they're not serious historians either. So so that's going to be okay. So that's going to be our final question for the night. So we've taken a whole bunch of non-super chats tonight and a few and many super chats. So anyway, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. This is going to be it. I want to remind everyone that not this Monday, but the following Monday, the 16th, we're having a popcorn review at 8 p.m. Monday the 16th. So we were glad that everyone could join us tonight. I want to thank everyone who provided a super chat and helped support this channel. We really, really appreciate it. We're very grateful for the very first question, who basically suggested putting cards in your church to let people know about our channel, Ancient Egypt and the Bible. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters who are currently right now saving our collective necks from our catastrophic hard drive crash on Christmas. I also want to thank those who are our subscribers and just watch our videos, who like, dislike, leave comments. That helps the algorithm, because the algorithm is very, very hungry for that. So with that said, I want to wish everyone a great night. I want to wish those who practice Eastern Orthodoxy a Merry Christmas for tomorrow. Take care, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Have a great night, everyone.